The night he came to collect a debt, he found the one thing money could never buy back. Rain tapped against the cracked windshield in a tired rhythm as I pulled up in front of my father's house. The kind of small, aging place that always looked like it was holding its breath through winter, even in early spring. The porch light had burned out weeks ago, so the whole front of the house sat in darkness except for the weak yellow spill from the kitchen window. Lily was asleep in her booster seat in the back, her stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her chin, her curls damp from the mist that had followed us from downtown. I sat there for a second with both hands on the steering wheel, watching the shapes in the driveway that did not belong to us. 2 black SUVs. Clean. Silent. Too expensive for this neighborhood. My pulse started to climb before I even turned off the engine. My father had always been bad with money. Bad with promises too. But this felt bigger than another overdue bill or one of his slurred excuses. This felt like a consequence. I unbuckled slowly, then twisted around to brush the hair back from Lily's face. "Sweetheart," I whispered, gentle enough not to scare her. "Wake up for me." Her eyes blinked open, heavy with sleep. "Are we at Grandpa's?" she asked. "Yeah." I forced a smile I didn't feel. "Stay close to me, okay?" She nodded, still half dreaming, and reached for my hand as I lifted her out into the cold. The air smelled like wet pavement and old leaves. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and then went quiet. I led Lily up the front steps and into the house without knocking, because I never knocked here. I never had to. The first thing I saw was my father standing in the middle of the living room with both hands shaking at his sides. The second thing I saw was the man across from him. Adrian Cole looked exactly the way a bad memory should not. Taller than I remembered. Broader somehow. Dressed in a dark overcoat that fit him too well, like even the weather knew better than to touch him without permission. His hair was slicked back from his face, and there was still that stillness about him, that impossible, unsettling calm that made every room feel smaller when he stepped into it. 5 men in dark suits stood around him, quiet and watchful, but I barely noticed them after that first second because Adrian had turned, and his eyes had found mine. Everything inside me stopped. Not my breathing, not my heartbeat. Something deeper than that. Something older. His expression did not change right away, but I saw the recognition hit him all the same. It moved through him like a shadow under water, subtle and cold, and impossible to miss if you knew where to look. My father made a broken sound in the back of his throat. "Claire," he said, too fast, too strained. "You weren't supposed to come tonight." Adrian's gaze dropped to Lily's small hand wrapped around my fingers, then rose back to my face. "Claire Bennett," he said quietly, as if saying my name after all these years cost him something. His voice was lower than I remembered, rougher. I tightened my grip on Lily and stepped in front of her without thinking. "What are you doing here?" I asked. He looked past me toward my father. "I came for a debt." The room seemed to shrink around those 6 words. I could feel Lily leaning against my leg, warm and soft, and unaware of the storm gathering above her head. My father wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I told him I'd pay," he muttered, but even he didn't sound like he believed himself. Adrian never looked away from me. "You should have." I hated that my heart reacted to him before my mind did. Hated that one look from him could pull me backward through years I had spent trying to bury. There had been a time when Adrian Cole was just Adrian to me. Just a man with dangerous eyes and a careful smile and hands that always seemed to know exactly how close they were allowed to get. That man was gone now. Or maybe he had never existed at all. Lily shifted beside me, peeking around my coat with the fearless curiosity only children have. Adrian saw her then. Really saw her. And for the first time since I'd walked in, something in his face changed. Not softness. Not yet. But surprise. Sharp and silent. Like the ground beneath him had moved half an inch and he was the only one who felt it. My father tried to speak first, which told me just how afraid he was. Walter Bennett had spent most of my life filling silence with excuses, but now he looked like a man who had run out of both luck and lies. His hand shook as he reached for the back of a dining chair, steadying himself against wood that groaned under the pressure. "Claire, take Lily upstairs," he said, not looking at me. "This does not concern you." Adrian's eyes stayed on my daughter. Not in a cruel way. Not even in a guarded one. It was worse than that. He looked at her like he was trying to solve something his mind had already begun to understand before his pride would let him say it aloud. Lily tucked herself tighter against my side. Her rabbit pressed to her chest, and I felt the tiny shift in her breathing that meant she was fully awake now, fully aware that grown-ups were using the kind of voices that changed everything. "I am not going anywhere," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Adrian finally looked at me again, and the room changed with it. "No," he said quietly. "You are not." One of the men near the doorway moved half a step, like he was adjusting his position, but Adrian lifted 2 fingers without turning around. The man stopped instantly. That small gesture did more to remind me who Adrian was now than the black SUVs outside ever could. Power used to announce itself in noise when I was younger. Men raised their voices. They made threats. They wanted to be seen. Adrian had learned the opposite. Real power lowered the room around it. Real power made other people whisper. My father swallowed hard. "The debt is mine," he said. "Leave her and the little girl out of this." Adrian's expression did not shift, but I caught a flicker of something colder in his eyes. "You should have thought of that before I had to come here myself." Lily looked up at me. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice soft and uncertain. "Who is he?" It was such a small question, but it landed like a crack through glass. I opened my mouth and found nothing there. Nothing safe. Nothing simple. Adrian did not answer either. He just kept watching her. With that strange stillness, as if every instinct he had was suddenly pulling in 2 directions at once. Then Lily did what children always do when adults fail them. She stepped around my coat and looked for the truth herself. "I know you," she said, frowning a little. "No, sweetheart," I said too quickly. "You do not." But her eyes never left Adrian's face. She studied him the way she studied clouds from the back seat, searching for shapes, trying to make sense of what she felt before she knew the words for it. "You look like the picture." My father made a sharp sound under his breath. My entire body went cold. Adrian's gaze snapped to me so fast it felt physical. "What picture?" he asked. The question was calm. That was what made it dangerous. I could not breathe right for a second. There had only ever been one picture. A photograph I had kept hidden in the back of an old jewelry box, buried beneath receipts and hospital bracelets, and all the pieces of the life I did not let anyone touch. Adrian at 28, standing in winter light with one hand in the pocket of his coat, looking away from the camera like he already knew staying still was a risk. I had never meant for Lily to find it. But children found everything eventually. "Claire," Adrian said, and this time my name sounded less like recognition and more like a demand. Before I could answer, Lily took one tiny step closer to him. Her voice dropped to almost nothing, soft enough that I might have believed I imagined it if the whole room had not gone so still around it. "Are you my dad?" No one moved. Rain tapped against the kitchen window. The old refrigerator hummed. Somewhere upstairs, a pipe knocked once inside the wall. Adrian stared at her like the world had tilted beneath his feet, and he had not decided yet whether to fight for balance or let himself fall. My father closed his eyes. I felt every secret I had carried for 7 years rise inside my throat at once, sharp and unforgiving. And when Adrian finally looked at me again, there was no distance left in his face. Only the past. Only the question I had spent years outrunning. And the terrible understanding that it had found me anyway. For one impossible second, Adrian did not look like the man who had walked into this house surrounded by silence and expensive wool and consequences. He looked stripped down to something rawer than anger. Not softer, just more dangerous in a way I had never seen before, because cold control I understood. This was different. This was what happened when control cracked without breaking. Lily waited in the middle of the living room, one hand hanging at her side, the other still holding that worn rabbit by one ear. She was only 6, but there had always been something unervingly clear in the way she looked at people, as if children could still see truths adults had learned to bury under bills and shame and years of pretending. Adrian lowered himself slowly, as if any sudden movement might frighten her away, until he was closer to her height. His coat opened slightly at the front. Rain darkened the shoulders. He kept his hands where she could see them. "Who told you that?" he asked, and his voice had changed. It had gone quieter, rough at the edges. Lily glanced back at me first. I saw the hesitation there. The way children check their mother's face before deciding how honest the world was allowed to be. "Nobody told me," she said. "I saw your picture." Adrian looked at me again. Not hard. Not yet. But there was no room left to hide in that gaze. My father sank into the nearest chair like his bones had finally given up pretending to hold him together. "Claire," he muttered. Do not do this here. I laughed once, and the sound came out thin and wrong. Here, I said. You think there was ever going to be a good place for this? My throat hurt. My chest hurt. Everything inside me felt too tight to survive another minute in that room. But Lily was still standing there, and Adrian was still kneeling in front of her like he had forgotten the debt, the house, the men by the door, the entire life he had brought with him. Mommy keeps it in a little box, Lily said, looking back at him. You were wearing the same face. Adrian closed his eyes for half a second, just long enough for me to notice. When he opened them again, he did not look at my father. He looked at me. How old is she? The question was simple. The answer was not. I should have lied. Maybe not for long. Maybe not convincingly. But I should have tried. Instead, I just stood there with rainwater drying at the hem of my jeans and the past rising around my ankles like floodwater, and I said the one thing I could not unsay. She turned 6 in February. No one in the room moved. One of Adrian's men looked toward the floor. Another shifted his jaw and stared straight ahead with the trained emptiness of someone who knew better than to witness what his boss had not asked him to see. Adrian did the math instantly. I watched him do it. Watched memory move behind his eyes like lightning buried inside storm clouds. February. 7 years ago. The last winter before I disappeared. The last month before I learned I was carrying more than heartbreak out of Boston. My father stood too quickly, knocking his knee against the table. Enough, he snapped, and his voice trembled under the force of the word. You came for money. Take it up with me. Leave my daughter and her child out of your world. Adrian rose to his full height, so smoothly it barely looked like movement. Lily took a small step backward until her shoulder touched my leg, but she did not hide. Adrian's face had gone still again, which somehow frightened me more than anything else. My world? He said, turning toward Walter at last. You mean the world you decided she needed saving from? My father lifted his chin with the stubbornness of old men and bad fathers. I mean the world that would have swallowed her whole. Adrian gave one short nod, like he had expected that answer and hated it anyway. So you hit her. His eyes went to Lily. You hit both of them. My father's mouth tightened. I protected them. The room filled with the sound of the rain outside. A gutter spilled somewhere near the side yard. Water drummed against the old siding in a tired, relentless rhythm. Adrian looked at me, and there it was at last, the thing I had known would come the moment Lily spoke. Not rage. Something heavier. A wound dressed in discipline. Did you know? He asked. He did not mean now. He meant then. The early weeks. The months after I vanished. All the years he had lived without even the shape of the truth. I swallowed against the burn in my throat. I found out after I left. His expression did not change, but I saw his hand curl once at his side before he forced it still again. And you never told me. That was the accusation. Not loud. Not cruel. Just unbearable because it was true. I had imagined this moment 100 different ways over 6 years, and every version had ended with me stronger than this. Colder. More certain. But the real thing was worse because Adrian was not shouting. He was just standing there looking at our daughter like every year he had missed had suddenly taken human form. Lily tugged lightly on my sweater. Mommy, she whispered, is he really my dad? I looked down at her, then back at him. And in Adrian's face I saw it all at once. The night I met him, the man I loved, the danger I ran from, the future I thought I was denying to keep my baby safe. My voice came out barely above a whisper. Yes. The word changed the air. My father sat down hard again like the fight had gone out of him. Adrian did not move for a full second. Then Lily looked up at him, blinking slowly, and offered him the rabbit she carried everywhere when she was nervous. The gesture was so small it nearly broke me. Adrian stared at the toy like he had never been handed anything gentle in his life. When he took it, his fingers were careful, almost reverent. And when Lily smiled, shy and uncertain and trusting in a way only a child could be, I knew the debt that had brought him here was no longer the most dangerous thing in the room. Adrian still held Lily's rabbit in one hand, as if he had forgotten it was there. The sight of that alone was enough to make the room feel unreal. Nothing in the last 7 years had prepared me for this version of him. This man standing in my father's dim living room with rain on his coat and my daughter's trust resting in his palm like something breakable. Lily leaned lightly against my leg, calmer now that the question had an answer, because children had a way of accepting truths adults shattered under. She did not care about timing or blame or the kind of power that followed Adrian like a second shadow. She only cared that the shape in her head had become a person. "Do you want to sit down?" she asked him softly, like he was the one who might fall. Adrian looked at her for a long second, then at the worn couch against the wall, the one with the blanket draped over one arm to hide the tear in the fabric. It was the kind of furniture men like him were probably never supposed to notice. But he crossed the room anyway and sat with a slowness that told me his thoughts were somewhere far more dangerous than this house. Lily watched him, then looked up at me for permission. I did not know what the right answer was anymore, so I gave her the only one motherhood had taught me when life turned impossible. I nodded once. She walked over and climbed onto the couch beside him, small sneakers tucked neatly beneath her knees, rabbit missing from her arms for maybe the first time in months. Adrian glanced down at her like he still could not believe she was real. "You kept my picture," he said without looking at me. I wrapped my arms around myself and hated that he could still hear the truth inside my silence. "I kept one," I said. My father scoffed from the table, brittle and exhausted. "That was your mistake." Adrian turned his head toward him, and the air in the room dropped 10 degrees. "No," he said. "Your mistake was deciding you had the right." Walter pushed himself upright again, palms flat against the table this time. "I had every right. I saw what your life was becoming. I saw the people around you, the cars, the men, the whispers. Claire was 23 and pregnant and scared, and you think I was supposed to hand her back to that?" Adrian rose so suddenly that Lily startled. He caught himself at once, stopping the motion halfway, every line of him hard with restraint. "Enough," I snapped before either of them could say something that would stain the room beyond repair. My voice surprised all three of us, even me. Adrian looked at Lily first, not at Walter, and lowered himself back to the couch. That one choice told me more than any apology could have. My father noticed it too. I saw the realization pass over his face like bitterness swallowed too late. Adrian had changed. Or maybe fatherhood had reached him in a single breath and altered the shape of his control. Lily touched the sleeve of his coat, curious. "Are you rich?" she asked. The question would have been funny in any other moment. It almost was now. Adrian blinked once. "I do all right," he said. Lily nodded seriously, then looked around the room as if comparing worlds. "Grandpa says rich people do not stay." My father shut his eyes. Shame crept up my throat, hot and ugly. Adrian did not answer right away. He studied Lily with that same impossible focus, and when he finally spoke, his voice had lost every sharp edge. Maybe Grandpa met the wrong kind. Lily seemed to consider that, then leaned her head against the back cushion and looked at him with open curiosity. "Did you know about me?" she asked. The room went still again. Adrian did not lie. That was the cruel part of him, and maybe the honorable part too. "No," he said. "I did not." "Would you have come if you knew?" she asked. I closed my eyes for 1 second because 6-year-olds should not ask questions that could split grown people open. But Adrian answered her anyway. "I would have been there the day you were born." His voice did not rise. It barely changed at all. That made it hurt more. I looked away before my face could betray me. There had been a hospital room in Albany with pale yellow walls and a snowstorm outside and a silence beside my bed so vast I had thought it might swallow me whole. I had held Lily against my chest and told myself loneliness was safer than love tied to danger. I had repeated that lie for 6 years until it sounded like motherhood. My father rubbed both hands over his face. "You do not get to rewrite history because a child asked you a question." Adrian stood this time more carefully, placing the rabbit on the couch beside Lily before turning toward Walter. "No," he said, each word precise. "But I do get to know why you stole it." Walter laughed once, broken and humorless. "Stole?" He pointed toward me without taking his eyes off Adrian. "Ask her what she looked like when she came back. Ask her how long she cried without making a sound because she did not want me to hear. Ask her what kind of future she thought she was carrying." Adrian's face changed then, not in anger, but in pain so tightly leashed it barely showed at all. He looked at me, and I knew he was seeing more than the woman in front of him. He was seeing the girl I had been at 23, pale and sick and stubborn, arriving at my father's door with one duffel bag and a secret already rooted beneath my heart. "Claire," he said quietly, and I hated the tenderness in it because it came 7 years too late. Lily looked from one adult to the other, sensing the shift in a way children always did. Did something bad happen? She asked. I moved toward her immediately, kneeling in front of the couch and taking both her hands in mine. No, baby, I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. Something hard happened. A long time ago. She studied my face, then Adrian's, and I could see the exact second she understood more than I wanted her to. Not details. Children did not need details to feel sorrow. They only needed tone. She slid off the couch and crossed the small space between us, then did the one thing none of us deserved. She took Adrian's hand in one of hers and mine in the other. Her fingers were warm. Certain. Then do not be mad now, she whispered. Adrian looked down at her tiny hand wrapped around his, and whatever answer he might have had died before it reached his mouth. Outside, thunder rolled low and distant across the sky. Inside, my daughter stood between the past and the man it belonged to, holding both of us like she believed that was enough to keep a family from breaking. The house went quiet after that, the kind of quiet that did not feel peaceful so much as fragile, like one wrong word might send the whole thing crashing into pieces nobody could put back together. Lily still stood between us, one small hand in mine, the other in Adrian's, as if she had appointed herself the only bridge left in the room. My father stared at the floorboards with the hollow look of a man finally losing control of the story he had repeated for too many years. Rain slid down the kitchen window in silver lines. The clock over the stove ticked too loudly. Somewhere in the back of the house, the heater kicked on with a tired rattle. Adrian was the first to move. Slowly, carefully, he loosened his hand from Lily's without making it feel like a rejection, then crouched in front of her again until they were eye level. It is late, he said softly. You should be in bed. Lily tipped her head. Are you leaving? The question hit all of us at once. Adrian did not answer right away. His gaze flicked to me, then to my father, then back to her. I do not know yet. It was not the answer a child wanted, but it was an honest one. Lily seemed to accept that more easily than most adults ever would. Grandpa has pancakes in the morning, she said. Sometimes they burn a little, but I still eat them. Adrian's mouth shifted, not quite a smile, but close enough to make my chest tighten. I had known that expression once, back when his smiles were rare and real and meant only for me. That sounds important, he said. Lily nodded with deep seriousness. It is. I touched her shoulder gently. Sweetheart, why do not you go upstairs and wash your face? I will come tuck you in. She looked between us again, reading tension the way some children read bedtime stories. You promise? She asked me. I promise. Then, after one more glance at Adrian, she stepped close enough to whisper to him, though the whole room heard it anyway. Do not disappear. Adrian went still. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Just still in a way that made every person in the room feel it. Lily turned and padded toward the stairs in her little sneakers, her socks peeking above the heels, leaving her rabbit forgotten on the couch beside the lamp. I waited until I heard the soft creak of the first few steps before I exhaled. The second she was out of sight, the room changed. The gentleness left with her. Not entirely, but enough. My father pushed back his chair and stood, old anger stiffening his spine where fear had bent it before. This ends tonight, he said. You heard her. She is a child. You do not get to drag her into your life because of one twist of fate. Adrian stood too, but there was no heat in the motion. Only certainty. One twist of fate, he repeated. She is my daughter. Walter lifted his chin. She is Claire's daughter. She is safe. That should be enough for you. Safe. Adrian's voice stayed quiet, which always made him more dangerous to argue with. In a house where collectors can walk through the front door? In a neighborhood where two black trucks parked outside make every curtain on the street move? My father flinched because he knew it was true. I hated that it was true too. Adrian turned to me then, and the force of his attention felt almost physical. How much does he owe? He asked. Walter answered before I could. That is none of her concern. Adrian did not even spare him a glance. I was not asking you. The old fury rose in me then, quick and familiar, because no matter how shaken I was, no matter how much of the past had been dragged back into this room, I still remembered what it felt like to be cornered by Adrian's certainty. Do not do that, I said. Do not walk in here after 7 years and start acting like you have a right to command anything. His eyes met mine, steel gray in the low kitchen light. Tired, shocked, unreadable in every way except one. I am not commanding you, Claire. He took one measured step closer. I am trying to understand what I walked into. I folded my arms tighter across my chest. You walked into exactly what you came for. My father borrowed money from the wrong people, and now you are here. No, Adrian said. I came for a debt. I found a family hidden behind it. The words landed too close to the truth. My father made a bitter sound. Family. He pointed toward the stairs where Lily had disappeared. You do not know the first thing about being her father. Adrian's jaw tightened once. Then I will learn. It should have sounded arrogant. With any other man, it would have. But there was something in the way he said it that made the room pause. Not ownership. Not performance. A vow forming in real time. My father heard it too, and that frightened him more than anger would have. You cannot buy your way into this, Walter said. Adrian's expression hardened by a fraction. Good. Because I am not interested in buying what was already mine. I closed my eyes for 1 second, just long enough to steady the shaking in my hands. That word again. Mine. Years ago it had sounded like danger wrapped in devotion. Tonight it sounded like grief with nowhere else to go. Stop, I said. Both of you. They did, and that alone exhausted me. I looked at my father first. He had protected me in the only broken way he knew how, but protection built on silence still left damage behind. Then I looked at Adrian, the man I had once loved enough to run from because loving him and fearing for my child had become the same thing. I left because I was scared, I said quietly. Not of you alone. Of everything around you. Every phone call you would not explain. Every man who watched too closely. Every night I waited for your key in the door and wondered if this would be the one that changed everything. Adrian did not interrupt. That hurt more than if he had. Then I found out I was pregnant. I continued, my voice thinning at the edges. And for the first time in my life, fear did not belong only to me anymore. My father sat down heavily, his anger draining into old age and regret. Adrian said nothing for so long I thought maybe he had none of the words I wanted to hear. Then he reached toward the couch, picked up Lily's rabbit, and held it in both hands like a man being trusted with something sacred. You should have told me, he said. The accusation was there, but quieter now. More wounded than sharp. Maybe, I whispered. But I did not believe your world would let me keep her. Adrian looked down at the rabbit for a moment, then back at me. When he spoke again, his voice was so low I almost missed it. Then my world failed before I ever knew her name. Outside, headlights swept across the front curtains and kept moving down the street. Every muscle in Adrian's body changed at once. Not panic. Awareness. Immediate and absolute. He turned his head slightly toward the window, listening to something none of us could hear yet. One of the men near the door touched his earpiece and straightened. Boss, he said just once. Adrian's gaze snapped to him. What is it? The man hesitated. A car has circled the block twice. My father went pale. I felt the blood leave my face too. Adrian did not. He only looked toward the staircase where Lily had gone, then back at me, and in that single glance I understood before he said a word. Whatever was about to happen next, this house was no longer safe enough for secrets. Adrian did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room had already bent around him, around the sudden shift from old secrets to present danger. He looked at the man near the door once, and that was enough. The guard moved to the window without another word, pulling the edge of the curtain aside just half an inch. Rain streaked the glass. Streetlights blurred into pale gold smears across the wet pavement. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, fast and uneven, matching the frantic rhythm of every bad decision I had ever made. How many? Adrian asked. One sedan, the man said. Dark-colored. Tinted windows. It passed slow twice. My father braced both hands on the kitchen table like he might fall without it. Maybe it is nothing. Adrian turned to him with a look so controlled it made my stomach knot. Men like me do not survive by calling that nothing. Then he looked at me, and the next words landed with terrifying simplicity. Go get Lily. I should have argued. Part of me wanted to. The old reflex rose fast, hot, familiar. But another part of me, the one that had spent 6 years counting exits and checking rearview mirrors and pretending caution was only a habit, already knew he was right. I turned toward the stairs without another word and climbed them 2 at a time, my hand skimming the banister worn smooth by decades. The hallway upstairs smelled like dust and laundry soap and the lavender sachets my mother used to tuck into drawers before she died. Lily was in the small guest room at the end, sitting cross-legged on the quilt, waiting exactly where I had promised I would find her. She looked up as I stepped inside. "Mommy," she asked, "what is happening?" I knelt in front of her and pushed a loose curl away from her face. "We are going to take a little ride, okay?" Her brows pinched. Now. Children always knew when adults were pretending not to be afraid. She slid off the bed quietly and reached for my hand. "With him?" she asked. I did not need to ask who she meant. Downstairs, a floorboard creaked. Voices stayed low, controlled. I swallowed against the ache in my throat. "Yes," I said. "With him." She seemed to think about that, then nodded once as if accepting a rule she had not known existed until tonight. I grabbed her coat from the hook behind the door and slipped it over her pajamas, then lifted her into my arms for just a second, holding her closer than I meant to. She smelled like baby shampoo and sleep and the kind of innocence I had spent years trying to defend from men like Adrian. The tragedy was that tonight the safest place in the world might be beside him. When I carried her downstairs, everyone looked up at once. My father's face crumpled when he saw Lily in her little pink coat. "Claire," he said, his voice rough, "do not take her." Adrian stepped forward before I could answer, already reaching for the front door with one hand and Lily's rabbit with the other. "She does not stay here tonight." "You do not decide that," my father snapped. Adrian stopped in the center of the room and turned back, his expression carved from something colder than anger. "No," he said. "Her mother does." Every eye came to me then. My father's desperate. Adrian's unreadable. The men by the door waiting for instruction. Lily's wide and trusting from the circle of my arms. The weight of the decision hit me all at once, heavy as winter water. This house had been my shelter once. My hiding place. The one place I believed the past could not reach. But the past was already standing in the living room, holding my daughter's rabbit and watching the street like a man who knew danger by the shape of its silence. "We go," I said. My father made a broken sound. "Claire, please." I looked at him and saw age where I used to see authority, love where I had spent years seeing only control. He had done the wrong thing for reasons he believed were right, and now all of us were paying interest on it. "I am not leaving you forever," I whispered. "Just tonight." Adrian opened the door. Cold air rushed in at once, carrying the smell of rain and wet asphalt. One of his men stepped outside first, scanning the street. Another moved toward the porch with an umbrella he must have produced from nowhere. Adrian came to stand in front of me, close enough that I could see rain dried in faint silver marks along his collar. He held out the rabbit to Lily. She took it, then reached one small hand toward him without hesitation. Adrian stared at her fingers for half a heartbeat before he took them carefully in his own. The sight hit something deep in me, something bruised and unready and impossible to name. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. It was meant for both of us. We stepped into the night together, and as the cold rain kissed my cheeks and black SUVs waited at the curb like a future I had once fled, I realized with a sharp, painful certainty that the debt Adrian came to collect had already changed form. It was no longer about money. It was about lost years, broken trust, and a 6-year-old girl walking between us as if she had always been meant to. The rear door of the SUV opened before we reached it, and warm air spilled out into the rain, carrying the clean scent of leather and something faintly cedar beneath it. One of Adrian's men held the umbrella high above Lily and me, shielding us from the worst of the weather, but Adrian still kept his body angled toward the street like he did not trust darkness just because it looked ordinary. Lily climbed into the back seat first, clutching her rabbit against her chest, and then scooted across the wide bench seat with the solemn concentration of a child trying to be brave. I followed after her, my jeans damp at the hem, my nerves stretched tight enough to hum. Adrian closed the distance behind us a second later and slid into the seat across from us instead of taking the front, which should not have surprised me and somehow still did. The door shut with a heavy thud that muted the storm outside. For one suspended moment, the world narrowed to soft dashboard light, rain tracing silver lines across tinted glass, and the three of us breathing the same air for the first time in 6 years. The convoy pulled away from the curb so smoothly I barely felt the motion. Lily looked out the window, then back at Adrian. "Do you always ride in cars like this?" she asked. Adrian rested one forearm on his knee, his coat still damp at the shoulders, his expression less guarded than it had been in the house. "Not always," he said. "Sometimes I walk." Lily smiled a little at that, and the tension in the back seat shifted by a fraction. Mommy does not like driving in the rain, she told him. She squeezes the wheel too hard. Heat climbed into my face. Thank you for sharing, I muttered. Adrian's gaze flicked toward my hands, still curled too tightly around the strap of my purse. Noted, he said quietly. His tone held no mockery. That made it worse. Or better. I could not tell anymore. We drove through streets I knew by heart at first, then on to broader avenues where the city opened into wet ribbons of light and half-empty intersections blinking red and yellow into the night. Lily, who treated silence like a personal challenge, shifted onto her knees and studied Adrian openly. Do you have a house? She asked. I do. A big one. Yes. Do you have pancakes? Adrian blinked once. I can arrange pancakes. She accepted that with a nod, apparently satisfied that wealth still had practical uses. I turned my face toward the window so neither of them would see the ache rising behind my ribs. There was something almost unbearable in the simple rhythm of it, in watching Adrian answer her as though he had been waiting his whole life for questions no 6-year-old should have had to ask a stranger. After a minute, Lily's curiosity softened into something quieter. Were you really going to come when I was born? She asked. The words settled over the back seat like snowfall. I looked at Adrian then, because I needed to know if he would flinch from the truth when it mattered. He did not. Yes, he said. If I had known about you, nothing would have kept me away. Lily looked down at her rabbit's worn ears, smoothing one flat with careful fingers. I was little then, she said, as if apologizing for being hard to find. Adrian's whole face changed for one brief second, enough that I had to look away. You still are, he said softly, and none of that was your fault. The city lights strobed across his features as we passed under overhangs and through rain. For the first time all night, I saw not the man people feared, not the man I had run from, but the one who had once stood in my kitchen at midnight making coffee too strong and promising me a life neither of us had understood well enough to keep. Memory was cruel that way. It returned in perfect detail only when it could do the most damage. My phone buzzed in my purse, loud in the hushed car. I pulled it out and saw my father's name on the screen. One missed call, then another, almost immediately. Adrian saw my face change. Answer it, he said. I hesitated, then pressed the phone to my ear. Dad. All I heard at first was his breathing, too fast, too uneven. Then his voice came through, ragged with panic. Claire, listen to me carefully. 2 men just came to the house asking where you went. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like the floor had vanished beneath me. What? Adrian sat forward at once, every line of him sharpening. I did not need to explain. He had already understood from my face alone. I told them nothing, my father rushed on. But they knew your car. They knew you came tonight. Claire, I think they were watching before Adrian ever got there. Lily looked up at me, sensing the change instantly. Her small hand found mine in the dark. Adrian's voice stayed low, precise. Put him on speaker. I did. My father heard him and fell silent for half a beat. Walter, Adrian said. Did they mention a name? No, my father swallowed audibly. But they said the debt does not disappear just because the collector changed. Adrian's jaw tightened. The words meant something to him. Something immediate. Drive faster, he told the man in front, and the SUV surged almost imperceptibly as the engine answered. I stared at him. Who are they? He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the moment calculation gave way to certainty. People who should not know about you, he said. Then his gaze shifted to Lily, to her small hand wrapped around mine, and something colder settled over his features. Not cruelty. Resolve. Which means somebody talked. The city blurred outside as we cut through rain and reflected neon, and I understood with sick clarity that leaving my father's house had not ended anything. It had started the part of the story where secrets stopped hiding and began to cost more than money ever could. By the time the gates opened, my pulse had not slowed once. They rose out of the rain in black iron silence, tall enough to make the city outside feel like another country. The SUV rolled forward over wet stone, tires whispering across a driveway lined with low lights half hidden in trimmed hedges. Adrian's house was not a house in any ordinary sense. It was an estate built to keep the world out, all pale stone and long dark windows reflecting the storm like it had been invited in. Lily pressed her hand to the glass and breathed a small wow that fogged the window for half a second. I remembered feeling something similar the first time I saw one of Adrian's places years ago. Not admiration. Not exactly. More like the strange loneliness of understanding how far money could carry a man from the life of everyone else. The SUV stopped beneath a covered entrance. Before I could reach for the handle, Adrian's door was already open and he was out in the rain, speaking low to one of the men waiting under the lights. The words were too quiet to make out, but the effect was immediate. Two more men moved toward the perimeter. Another headed inside ahead of us. Layers. Plans inside plans. It was the kind of life I had once told myself I could never raise a child around. Adrian opened our door himself. "Come on," he said, and his voice was gentler than the night deserved. I stepped out first, then helped Lily down. She took Adrian's hand before I could stop her, not because she trusted easily, but because children trusted what felt steady, and tonight he did. We crossed the threshold into a foyer larger than my father's entire first floor. Marble underfoot. A chandelier. Above us, scattering warm light across polished surfaces. A staircase curving upward like it belonged in a hotel. Lily tilted her head all the way back. "This is your house?" she whispered. Adrian glanced down at her. "It is. Do you get lost in it?" A sound almost like amusement touched his face. "Sometimes." For one impossible second, Lily smiled at him like that answer mattered more than everything else that had happened tonight. Then the smile faded as children's smiles often do when exhaustion catches up. Her shoulders drooped. Her rabbit hung loose in one hand. Adrian noticed it before I did. "She needs sleep," he said quietly. A woman appeared from the hallway to the right, maybe in her 50s, silver threaded through dark hair pulled into a neat knot, wearing a navy cardigan over black slacks. She moved with the calm competence of someone who had seen too much to be surprised by anything. "This is Mrs. Alvarez," Adrian said. "She runs this house better than I ever could." Mrs. Alvarez's eyes softened immediately when they landed on Lily. "You must be freezing, sweetheart," she said. "I have warm milk, clean towels, and a guest room that still smells like fresh laundry." Lily looked at me for permission. I nodded, though my chest tightened at the ease of it, at how quickly this strange place was making room for her. "Can Mommy come too?" she asked. "In a minute," I said, crouching to fix the collar of her coat. "You go with Mrs. Alvarez, and I will be right there." Lily's gaze slid to Adrian. "Are you staying?" He knelt in front of her again, and I was beginning to think that for all his power, he understood instinctively that everything important tonight happened at her height, not his. "I am staying," he said. She studied his face like she was testing the truth of it, then nodded and let Mrs. Alvarez guide her toward the hallway, rabbit tucked under her arm, small sneakers silent on the marble floor. I watched until she disappeared around the corner. Only then did I remember how to breathe. The second she was gone, the house seemed bigger and colder. Adrian straightened slowly and turned to me. "She can have the blue room," he said, like that detail mattered. "It is quiet. No street-side windows." I stared at him. "Do you hear yourself?" His expression shifted, guarded now. "Yes." "No, Adrian." My voice came out sharper than I intended, brittle with exhaustion and fear and too many years folding in on themselves. "You do not get to stand there and assign rooms like this as normal. None of this is normal." He held my gaze without flinching. "I know. Do you?" I laughed once, low and unbelieving. "Because from where I am standing, it looks like you slipped right into this. Security. Orders. A 6-year-old who did not know your face 3 hours ago now asking if you were staying." The words hit harder than I meant them to. I saw it in the stillness that passed over him. But he did not look away. "I am not slipping into anything, Claire." He took one measured step closer. The marble reflected the low light beneath his shoes. Rain still darkened the edge of his collar. "I am trying not to waste one more minute." The honesty of that landed where anger could not. I folded my arms tighter across myself because suddenly the room felt too open. "You cannot fix 6 years in one night. I know that too." His voice dropped, roughened slightly by something he was no longer hiding as well. "But I can start by making sure she is safe." Safe. The word followed me everywhere. I had built an entire life around it, and still never found a version that stayed. I looked toward the hallway where Lily had gone, toward the warm pocket of this impossible house where my daughter was being handed milk by a woman with kind eyes while men guarded the gates outside. Who would come after her? I asked. Adrian's jaw tightened. I do not know yet. That is not good enough. It is the truth. He raked one hand back through his hair, and the gesture was so familiar it knocked the air from my lungs. There he was for a second. Not the man the city whispered about. Just Adrian. Frustrated. Tired. Human in the worst possible moment. Somebody found out about the debt, he said. Then somebody found out you were there. That overlap should not have happened this fast unless information moved on purpose. I thought of my father's broken face at the kitchen table, of the men outside his house, of Lily in the backseat asking if she had been hard to find. So what happens now? Adrian looked at me for a long moment before answering. Now I lock this place down. I figure out who is talking, and I keep you here until I know the danger has passed. The old fury sparked instantly. You do not get to decide where I stay. Maybe not, he said. But tonight I am asking you not to make me argue with the mother of my daughter about whether she deserves walls thick enough to keep bad intentions out. The words should have infuriated me. Instead they hurt, because beneath the control and the authority and the impossible certainty, there was grief. Real grief. Not only for me. For Lily. For the years he had lost without even knowing their shape. My eyes burned. I hated that too. I did not bring her here for a reunion. I whispered. Adrian's face softened by the smallest degree. Neither did I. Silence stretched between us, heavy and unfinished. Then somewhere down the hall, Lily laughed softly at something Mrs. Alvarez had said. The sound floated back through the enormous house like a candle lit in a cathedral. Adrian heard it too. His whole expression changed. Not much. Just enough. And in that fragile shift, I finally understood the most dangerous truth of the night. The man I had once run from was not the greatest threat anymore. Losing her was. It was past midnight when I finally found Lily in the blue room. The door stood half open, spilling a soft amber glow into the hallway. And for 1 second I stayed where I was, my hand resting against the frame, just watching. Mrs. Alvarez had changed her into one of the tiny cotton sleep sets she must have found somewhere in this enormous house. Pale blue with little white stars, and Lily was already curled beneath a blanket that looked softer than anything I had ever owned. Her rabbit lay tucked beneath her chin. Her lashes rested against her cheeks in that heavy, perfect stillness only children carried into sleep, as if the world had not spent the last few hours rearranging itself around her. Adrian stood near the far side of the room, close to the window but not blocking it, one hand in the pocket of his dark slacks, the other hanging loose at his side. He had taken off his coat, rolled his sleeves once. In the warm bedside light, he looked less like the man who ruled rooms and more like a father trying not to breathe too loudly near his sleeping child. He turned when he sensed me, but he did not speak right away. Neither did I. The silence between us felt changed now. Not easier, just more honest. She fell asleep fast. I whispered. Adrian looked back at Lily, and something in his face softened in a way that made my chest ache. She was fighting it, he said quietly. Kept asking if you were coming. I stepped into the room and moved to the bed, brushing my fingers gently over Lily's curls. She stirred just enough to sigh and settle deeper into the pillow. I swallowed hard against the sudden sting in my eyes. She does that when she is in a strange place. Adrian was quiet for a second. Then she is braver than she should have to be. The words landed deeper than he probably knew. I straightened slowly and turned to face him. You cannot say things like that and expect them to fix anything. I know. His voice stayed low. I am not trying to fix it in one night. The rain had eased outside. It no longer battered the windows. It only whispered against the glass, a softer sound now, like the storm had exhausted itself. Somewhere below us, I could hear the distant murmur of voices, the quiet movement of the house settling into alertness instead of sleep. Men would be posted at doors. Phones would be ringing in rooms I could not see. Somewhere beyond the gates, somebody still knew enough to be dangerous. But in here, under the warm lamp and the hush of my daughter's breathing, the world felt smaller. Sharper. Adrian took one step toward the bed and stopped, leaving space between us like he understood that was the only reason I had not walked away yet. He looked down at Lily for a long moment before speaking. When she asked if I was staying, I realized something. I waited. His gaze never left our daughter. I have spent years building walls around everything in my life. Houses, businesses, people. I thought control was the same thing as safety. He finally looked at me then, and there was no shield left in his eyes. It is not. Safety is knowing who you would burn the whole illusion down for. My breath caught. It was too much truth for one exhausted night. Too much Adrian. Too late, and yet somehow exactly when it hurt most. I looked away first, because I had learned long ago that some forms of tenderness were more dangerous than anger. You do not get to become poetic now, I murmured, but there was no strength in it. Something like sadness touched his mouth. No, I suppose I lost that right too. We stood there in the quiet, the both of us looking at the little girl who had tied our lives back together with one whispered question and a rabbit held out in trust. Then Lily stirred again, blinking sleepily, her eyes finding us both in the lamplight. For a second, she looked confused, caught between dream and waking. Then her face relaxed. She lifted one small hand from the blanket and reached toward Adrian without fear. "Good night, Dad," she mumbled softly. Adrian froze. Not with shock this time. With reverence. With the kind of silence a man falls into when the world hands him something he knows he does not deserve and cannot live without. He crossed the room in 2 careful steps and took her tiny hand in both of his, as if it were the most fragile thing he had ever touched. "Good night, Lily," he said, and his voice broke so slightly that only someone who had once loved him would have heard it. She smiled without opening her eyes, already drifting again, and a second later she was asleep. Adrian stayed there beside the bed, head bowed over her hand, while I stood on the other side and watched the man I had feared, the man I had loved, the man I had hidden my child from, become something else entirely. Not softer, not harmless, just real in a way power never was. Outside those walls, debts were still unpaid. Secrets were still moving through the dark. Morning would bring questions neither of us was ready to answer. But in that room, with rain fading against the glass and our daughter sleeping between us, one truth rose above all the others. He had come to collect what was owed. Instead, he found the part of himself that had been missing all along.